Now, BBC One Northern Ireland, including scenes that you may find upsetting, the untold story of the bomb squad men. The Long Walk.
In the white heat of the conflict in the early 1970s, Northern Ireland was the laboratory for bomb making and bomb disposal technology. The countermeasures developed then help save lives in Afghanistan today, as NATO forces fight the Taliban's deadly use of improvised explosive devices, better known as IEDs.
The hard yards earned by those guys in Northern Ireland in the early 70s have formed all the philosophy and principles that we have for improvised explosive device disposal. Remote means the wearing of a bomb suit, electronic countermeasures. All that experience has been learnt from Northern Ireland, especially 321 Squadron, which was operating at that time.
Dave Greenaway, Paul Wharton, and Dave Young served as bomb disposal officers in 321 Squadron at the height of the Northern Ireland conflict.
We lost 17 operators. None of these guys, not one of them, received a medal. And I think that's wrong.
With limited training, ammunition technical officers, better known as ATOs, were about to step into a conflict like no other.
And the fact is that in the early 70s, they were ordinary men doing an extraordinary job. And it was a job that many of them never expected to do, but found themselves doing it in the teeth of a storm, the like of which probably the world had never seen.
A bomb has an effect on the human body like no other weapon. The shockwave alone detaches the limbs from the trunk. It enters the mouth and blows off the top of the head. It turns human tissue into vapor. In some instances, all that remains is the spine. The IRA planted their first bomb of the Troubles in 1969, marking the start of a 30-year-long campaign. An ATO's lonely approach to a suspect device soon gained the fitting moniker, the Long Walk.
I would put on a bomb suit, my number two would dress me, and I'd be going through in my mind my plan of action.
People say, oh, the only reason we wore the suits was to keep our bodies together, because if you're on top of a bomb, the chances are if it goes off, you're not going to live.
The last thing that goes on, and it cuts you off from the rest of the world, is the helmet. The visor comes down, away you go.
There's something inside of you saying, walk slowly, and it'll take you longer, or walk quickly, and you're there quicker and get away quicker.
You're using all your senses. You were smelling, you were listening. Your mind was working in overdrive, thinking about plan A.
You can feel your pulse quickening, you can feel your palms sweating. As you walk, you know that there's nothing going to save you if that device functions.
Well, I was posted to Londonderry, and I was marched in front of the Colonel, and he laid the law down to me that I was there to do the job as I was trained to do. I wasn't there to be a hero, and no one during his tour of duty would be collecting medals, which was how it turned out. But I must say the Colonel did pick up an OBE when he left the province. You know, I expected to see peace and normality, but it's even more normal than I expected. All the people just going about their everyday business and no overt security measures anywhere. You know,
people actually on the streets has impressed me, which I didn't expect to see.
It just shows how resilient people are, aren't they? If you give them a chance to just get back to normal as
shows how
quickly as possible.
our mindset is still back 30 and 40 years ago.
There's a danger of that,
to some extent. I always wanted to be a soldier, so as soon as I was old enough, which was 15, I went down and signed up. Because I was a grammar school boy and done well in the aptitude tests, they said I should become an ammunition technician. But of course at that time nobody mentioned that part of the job involved bomb disposal.
The job is mainly around the inspection, the repair, storage and transport of the British Army's vast ammunition stocks. You need to know all the ins and outs of all the different ammunition types, natures and systems and so on. We were basically ammunition examiners. And then, of course, Northern Ireland kicked off. And then very quickly, I realised what I'd got into, as did others on the course. But it was too late then. Well, I was a young soldier then. I haven't seen really much of life at all. We arrived on the ferry, and I was amazed, really. The soldiers themselves looked like they hadn't slept for 3 or 4 nights. Their uniforms were tatty. Their weapons were wrapped in black masking tape. Their vehicles were spattered and paint, battered and smashed. And that was my first impression of Northern Ireland. Wherever you looked, there were sandbag bunkers, machine guns, vehicles rolling up and down, blue lights flashing. It looked like some sort of insurrection was underway.
The earliest IRA devices were basic and unstable, with timing mechanisms that differed little from those used by Republicans in the 1880s. The IRA was just learning its trade, but so too were the bomb squad. A personal battle between IRA bomb designers and the members of 321 EOD had begun.
A basic IED comprises very few components: a power source, a battery, some form of circuitry that links the battery to initiator, a switch of some description to arm the IED, and then you've got the main charge, which is either a military explosive, a commercial explosive, or a homemade explosive of some description.
The training of today's ATOs is overseen by Colonel Gareth Collett, who has the final say over who deploys on operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Gareth served 2 tours in Northern Ireland, one as an ATO in 1993.
Going right back to the start of it, the types of IED that people may encounter would be victim operated. You have to stand on it or pull something for it to function. Command, that could be command wire types of improvised explosive devices, or time. During the early days of the campaign in Northern Ireland, those 3 types of device developed to the best advantage that the provisional IRA could gain from them.
When Northern Ireland first started, the tools of the trade were tin snips, scissors. We had no remote equipment, so a lot of the early devices were cut into with a Stanley knife and wires cut with wire snips.
never ever cut wires unless we knew exactly what was there. This business about walking up to a bomb and cutting the red wire is pure Hollywood. And the only time I cut wires is if I split the device open and it was all laid out and I knew exactly what I was dealing with.
You're looking to separate out the electrical circuit and you're looking to separate out the explosive circuit. And if you can separate either of those two, the device is well on its way to being rendered safe.
By 1972, the IRA seemed to be able to cause civilian and military deaths at will in cities and towns across Northern Ireland.
People just staggering around in all different directions. Dust and muck in their eyes, and it's terrible. I saw 2 people dead, and there were at least 3 women with no legs, screaming.
Some in the British Army felt that, in the difficult urban environment, they were losing the war.
In the urban environment, line of sight is difficult. There's always the option for a chute to be put up against you, and it's quite easy for the perpetrator of the ID to escape. You have to go where the roads are. You have to negotiate yourself through all the clutter that you find in that sort of environment. You've got to get there as quickly as you possibly can to try and mitigate the threat and bring the situation back to normal.
So this is Royal Avenue. Somewhere down here was the Grand Central Hotel, behind which was the GPO sorting office. Now, at the moment, I can't recognise anything at all, so I guess we walk down here and see if I can pick up a couple of the side streets. My team and I were sent down into Belfast to be located in the Grand Central Hotel, which was being used as a barracks for the city centre regiment. This is all that's left of Garfield Street, I think, because I suspect there used to be a road here, so the central door of the hotel was, which we all poured out of, was somewhere around here. But actually, all that has completely gone. It's a very nice looking Debenhams. Late morning, suddenly the bomb alarm went off in the building. And I said, I'm an ATO, you know, what do you want? You know, what's going on? And he said, there's a bomb in the sorting office. You need to evacuate now. All arrived around the front of the Grand Central Hotel. And I was trying to collect my thoughts. It was full of people. Just teeming with noise and soldiers mixed up with civilians. Suddenly there was a small explosion in the sorting office. At which point, a chap then came out of the sorting office, which was about 50 yards away down this narrow alley. And I said, you know, is there anybody else in there? He said he was the boiler man and he didn't know it. No one had told him. So I said, right, I'm just going to have a quick look inside, make sure there's nobody there. So I ran into the building. I went up to the mezzanine floor and I looked through this door into this room full of smoke billowing out. In the back of my mind was this is an unusual modus operandi for the IRA. Small devices in this way are not the way they attack the Grand Central Hotel. And so I felt, well, I better leave here. I've done enough as I could, and I left the room, got to the top of the stairs, and a second device detonated, I found out later, above the doorway that I just walked out. And the blast blew me down the stairs, bits of plaster and rubble sort of falling about me. I had the distinct feeling that the hair on the back of my head was just stood up rigid. And then, what, 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, this massive explosion from the GPO sorting office, just this whacking rate, ba-boom. Well, you can't help but reflect on it, and you have to think how close to death you come. All operators have these near-death experiences. There's no doubt about it. You don't do this job without near-death experiences. Most people are lucky one way and the other. If you were to ask me, what would I rather be, a highly proficient operator or lucky? I think I would rather be lucky.
The IRA had developed a sophisticated new device containing 2 motion-sensitive switches which functioned as an anti-handling device. Suddenly, the ATO had become the target.
The first operator to be killed was Captain Stewardson. Captain Stewardson was called to the Castle Robin Orange Lodge near Belfast. And he was faced with a wooden container, and he was attempting to remove the lid off this device when it functioned.
We had scientists in UK working round the clock to produce things that could assist us, and they came up with disruptors. Disruptors were normally fired by explosive and sending something into the device so fast that it would cut wires quicker than the battery could send the power round to the detonator. Once you've disrupted a device, you would then put a hook and line on what was hopefully now a scattered device to just pull it to pieces. You could then cut out the detonator and the battery, provided it wasn't a complicated device.
But each of those is cat and mouse. A type of device would be developed, used against us to good effect. They would look at the equipment solutions that we'd brought in to try and deal with that, and they changed the way in which they employed the device to their advantage.
Go well, won't it?
Oh, well, I think that's it. That's blown that.
Chili sauce.
Yeah.
You got chili?
Chili.
Chili, yeah. I think in the early days in Northern Ireland, we had a few fatalities, and each one was investigated and gone into in great detail. And it was discovered that there might be the possibility that some of the operators were ignoring some of the newfangled devices that were coming in. And it was thought at the highest level that some people were perhaps getting high on the adrenaline and taking unnecessary risks. And they introduced psychometric testing to try and weed out the sort of traits in someone's personality where he might disregard safety procedures and take additional risks.
The first thing we had to do was sit for about 4 hours and go through like 4 exam papers. The questions were so loaded towards suicidal tendencies that we knew what the aim of that questionnaire was. But then we had others that it would ask questions like, would you like to wear pink furry slippers?
Do you like looking down railway lines that disappear into tunnels and this sort of thing? And we couldn't sort of understand why they were asking all these stupid questions.
None of us had any idea what the right answer was to these, so it was quite random. And then you would have like an hour's interview with the army psychiatrist, and he, in the end, would say whether you were fit to go to Northern Ireland or not.
The IRA bombing campaign was in full swing in Derry, where Dave Greenaway and Dave Young had been posted, involving regular trips over the often treacherous Glen Shane Pass.
Whenever we had to go down to Lisbon, normally to change a bit of equipment, perhaps that were broken down, or collect a new bit of equipment that had been developed, we used to come over the Glen Shane, and we knew the baddies used this as a training area, and we often travelled in a covert car, a Q car, and we were always concerned that we might get stopped by an illegal checkpoint.
There were two of you. You had pistols, but you didn't have an escort or anything like that, so if you were jumped on, it was up to you to get yourself out of it. Luckily, it never happened.
We were okay doing the things we were trained to do, but
Yeah.
the actual soldiering part of it, we were slightly out of our comfort zone.
Yeah, a bit foreign to us. Although they always say you're a soldier first and a tradesman second, but yeah.
In Londonderry, there were so many bombs being placed, especially on the weekend, Saturday. It was not unusual to have 15 to 20 bombs in the city at one time.
The Diamond, Austin's Chemist, and then Ferry Quay Street. So one of these must be, is that Ferry Quay Street?
I always remember we went to the Little Diamond, and I was doing a job there, and I shot a shotgun at the device because it was behind barbed wire and I wanted a bit of breathing space. And when I shot the shotgun, the crowd started singing "Nice One, Cyril."
Nice one, Cyril, nice one, Sam. Nice one, Cyril, let's have another one. And then they go, whoa, whoa. and it was just, it was a bit surreal because you had this real sort of party atmosphere and there's a massive great device there in the corner. So it was good.
One night I was called to Austin's store right in the very centre of Londonderry, a multiple-storey department store, and the alarm had gone off and terrorists had been seen going into the building. Policeman said, well, we were here within minutes of the alarm going off and the terrorists might still be in the building. So he said, oh, if I were you, I'd keep your eyes peeled, you know, and take a weapon. So I cocked my 9mm pistol as well. So I went into the building and I found two devices on the landing, blast devices, high explosive in them, and I shotgunned one of them and destroyed the disruptor, neutralised it, and I used the disruptor on the other timing power mechanism and it neutralised that one. And then I started to walk around the store looking to see if there are any more, and I bumped into a counter. And on the other end of the counter, a tailor's dummy fell over, and I spun around and I saw this body flash past my line of sight, and I put 3 rounds in it before it hit the ground. I felt rather stupid when I saw this tailor's dummy with its head all smashed open. And then I walked around the store and I found 4 more devices, so there were 6 bombs in the store. I didn't think they'd put any more than that in there to do the job they wanted to do, but, you know, I was quite proud of the fact that I saved the lovely old building and it's still here today. I found Londonderry quite a surprising place because I'd never experienced the sectarianism and the divided communities. When I was taken around and someone said, this is a Catholic estate or this is a Protestant estate, it's something I'd never experienced before. But I was up to date with current affairs, and I did realise that certain sectors of the community were disadvantaged, but I didn't see the reason for the violence and the bombs. In my eyes, you know, there were things that were wrong socially, and they should have been put right without resorting to violence and law-breaking. I remember there was a festival of Derry, and they had a display of model aircraft. We got our kit out and we were practicing with it, and we set our electronic countermeasure equipment to active from passive, so it swamped the frequencies. A lot of the model aircraft plunged into the foil. The boss came down screaming, "Shut it off, shut it off!" But I think the radio-controlled model club had quite a few baddies as members, and they used that as a way of acquiring the radio-controlled electronics that they used in some of the devices we had to deal with.
The technology battle between the IRA and the ATO intensified as the IRA's bomb-making capability advanced. They began to develop electromagnetic technology, radio-controlled bombs.
I was called to the Calais border post, which was a caravan. 2 or 3 men had arrived, placed a cardboard box inside the caravan, and then stuck a wire onto the door. That information led me to presume that it must have been a radio-controlled device, because if it was a booby trap, the slamming of the door would have activated whatever it was supposed to do. And therefore, the only reason for the wire to be stuck to the door was that it was an aerial.
I reckon the caravan was just about here. Yeah. Because I remember that field. I don't know if the shrubbery was there then. I don't think it was. We went into the open field. But it's, except for the housing, it's just certainly very familiar. Yeah.
Because it was customs post, of course, it was on the border, and the terrorist, we found out later on, was actually situated the other side of the border in a house not too far distant, waiting for me to walk up to the caravan. In those days, we had very new ECM equipment, electronic countermeasures, and as it was very new, no one really knew what it actually did. So I said to the operator that I'll dummy an approach and see what happens, and I'd only gone 10, 15 yards when he got a signal which confirmed that there was a radio-controlled device in the area. The terrorist, wherever we went, there was always someone there watching us. We knew that, and what they were doing was watching what we were doing. Luckily, we had another piece of equipment which allowed me to set off the device remotely, and therefore, all right, we lost a caravan, but we didn't lose a life.
You have to respect the capabilities of your opponent. If you don't respect him, he'll kill you. You need to know what his capabilities are, and by understanding his capabilities, you can work out the limitations. If we look at the provisional IRA in Northern Ireland, the IEDs range from simple devices to very, very complex devices. You could generally work out from your threat assessment that if there was no obvious target, it was probably you.
The introduction of the car bomb was a major development by the IRA. It meant the bomber could conceal the device from the ATO. He would have to open both the car doors and the boot to locate the bomb so that it could be worked on, each action providing an opportunity for a booby trap.
Terrorists started making homemade explosives, and these were less powerful than commercial explosives, and so they often had to increase the weight of the explosives. A very convenient way of delivering a bomb to an urban area would be to put it in a vehicle. The terrorists also worked out that if we were given too long to deal with them, we would be successful in dealing with a car bomb. And so they used the technique of making shorter and shorter time delays before the car bomb went off.
Mounting casualties within the bomb squad led Commanding Officer Lieutenant Colonel George Stiles to ask, with men having landed on the moon, how come bomb disposal officers have to walk up to a device and attach a string to it? He and a colleague dreamed up a remote vehicle that could tow a bomb into a workable space. Later, it could be used to carry other vital devices such as disruptors and cameras. The wheelbarrow, as it quickly became known, was a game changer in favor of the ATO and often meant the difference between life and death.
The early attempts at a remote control vehicle were very crude. When I was using it, it still had limitations of not being able to go through doorways and upstairs and that sort of thing all cross country. But the development of the techniques and the equipment was very, very rapid at that time. And we found that if we were able to put a small charge into the car to blow the doors and the windows open, quite often this disrupted the link between the timing mechanism and the main charge. We often were pushing this equipment to its limits, and while we were working on the ground, we were also feeding back information to help develop new bits of equipment. And we were improvising as we went along.
Some of the disruptive equipments that we would use on devices were quite violent. I had an anti-tank gun, which we carried in the back, 84mm Carl Gustav anti-tank gun, which we would fire from a stand. Again, the intention is to disrupt whatever the target is, so that's quite violent.
Part of the equipment that was developed in the early 70s was the protective clothing that we wore called the bomb suit. And this was very, very heavy. And we joked about the bomb suit and said, what use is this? You know, if we're going to be blown up, we're going to be blown to pieces and that's it. But it was pointed out that while we were making our approach to a device, should it function, the bomb suit may well save our lives.
Oh, this is very familiar. Yeah.
Middle of one night, I was called out to a suspect car bomb in Customs House Street, just around the corner from the Guildhall. And I understand the Guildhall had been caught in what's known as the Bin Man bomb, and the stained glass windows had been destroyed. And a lot of work was going on to restore the Guildhall back to its former glory. I understand the stained glass windows had just been replaced.
We were at Fort George and we came down round the back of the Guildhall and we parked our vehicle, and I set my remote vehicle, came up this road and down here, and carried out a controlled explosion. This is where we set up our incident control point, and when I decided, after I carried out the first controlled explosion, I had to suit up at this point and walk down the road here, carrying a weapon just in case I needed it, you know, a disruptor. And I was thinking about what I planned to do next. I was hoping the controlled explosion had done the job, and I got to this point here and I could see the car. It was just down there by that red letterbox. And I realised once I turned the corner, I was in danger from the car if it went up. I stood at this point here. I looked into the boot of the car and I could see 2 milk churns in the boot. And I could see that all the detonating cords and the power unit had been disrupted by the controlled explosion. So I thought the only job that was left to do was to get the milk churns out of the boot. And so the wheelbarrow wasn't capable of getting the milk churns out of it, but we had a sort of heavy duty, what we called an Eager Beaver, which is a cross-country capability remote control vehicle. As soon as it touched the vehicle, there was an almighty explosion. As soon as we heard the blast, we dived underneath the vehicles and some bits started landing around us. And the 2 milk churns that had been disconnected from the timing and power unit, they were expelled and rolled down the road here, and they didn't explode. We surmised that a 3rd milk churn on the back seat had exploded. And after putting the forensics together, we reckoned that it had been booby-trapped, maybe even aimed at someone like myself.
I don't think my bosses were too pleased because one of the remote control vehicles had been destroyed in the explosion. And I don't think the people of Londonderry are very pleased because the stained glass windows were blown in again. But having said that, if I hadn't removed those 2 milk truns from the boot, I think the Guildhall might have been destroyed. I did suspect that it might have been booby-trapped, but it was quite sobering to think that I'd been stood alongside this car, and a couple of minutes later there was a big hole in the ground, and the largest part of the car that I could find was no bigger than a grapefruit.
This is where I could have died, but I survived. It's a funny feeling. It's quite emotional. Yeah, quite emotional.
The provisional IRA had moved beyond sort of simple devices. They'd moved beyond electrical engineering type components and devices, and by then they'd sort of settled into the stuff that worked. They'd moved very, very rapidly to a point that really did stretch us, I would say. In a very small number of years, they developed very sophisticated tactics. We very much had to respond to what they were doing, so they would be ahead of the game.
They put in anti-handling devices, anti-lift switches, radio-controlled devices, trembler devices. The trouble with those devices, of course, is they're more difficult to make. And we had intelligence that some of the bomb makers were killing themselves trying to make these devices. And quite often, they would choose a young lad to go and lay the device, and occasionally they would get killed because when they pulled the pin out that they were told to pull out, the device was not safe and went up in their faces.
Now the IRA, often acting in their own backyard of South Armagh, could afford to be cunning, luring army vehicles into the killing zone. Unlike in the city, the bomber could have a vantage point where they were unlikely to be disturbed and could detonate the device by command wire, ensuring maximum effect.
In the rural environment, you've got to be able to what we call rehearse planned operations. Because if there's an IED in a rural area, why is it there? What's the purpose of that device being laid, and what's the likely target? Generally they are large, buried, probably command initiated to some degree, and you can bet your bottom dollar that they are trying to force you to use roads or something along those lines to try and bring you into a killing area.
Got a telephone call to report to the operations room at Bearsbrook. There was a civilian being talked to by the police and the operations staff, and he was a waterboard worker, and he'd been checking various culverts in the Chancellor's Road, and he was saying there was a couple of milk churns in this culvert. Well, you know, a couple of milk churns tells us one thing: it's an ambush device.
None of that was here. That house wasn't here. This house wasn't here. But what is unmistakable is
this wall. And this is it. This is that culvert. I mean, your nerves are absolutely stretched, and every sense that you have is on guard. So you're trying to look everywhere at once. You're looking especially where you're putting your feet. You're looking where you put your hands. You're looking for anything out of the ordinary that you might not expect to see down there. And to my surprise, there wasn't 2 milk churns. There was 7 milk churns, although even I couldn't see that at this point. There's so many I couldn't count them. We're talking about 1/4 of a ton of high explosives. A device of that nature is going to create a crater which is probably 10 feet deep by 20 to 30 feet diameter. There's a bloody great hole in the ground. So any vehicle passing over it at the time, you know, could be blown bits of it up to 1/4 of a mile away. You've got this sense of foreboding as you approach the blooming thing. As you can appreciate it, you're scared. These devices tend to be detonated one of 2 ways, either by remote control, radio control, or it would be by command wire. This particular device was a command wire device, so it had a 500-metre wire running up the side of a hill. Now, the Royal Engineers had tracked for us the command wire, which was laid and run along the hedge, all the way up to the firing point. And one of the engineers had spotted a blue battery pack. And I approached the battery pack with the intention of moving it, hook and lining it, because you never know, these things are booby-trapped. The ground had been trampled with cows. I was really pleased about that, because it wasn't going to be a pressure matter or anything. But as I was about to put the line around the battery pack, I noticed this very fine fishing wire. Following the fishing wire into the long grass, there was another device there. So the idea the terrorists would have detonated the device under a police or military vehicle on this road. They would have hoped that the army in hot pursuit would have pulled the battery pack and set off that secondary device, which was about 8 pounds of homemade explosives. So it's a case now then of dragging these milk churns out into the open where you can get to them, and once it's all dismantled, it's just a case of them withdrawing out of the place and the country will be put back to normal. We neutralised that device, and later in the year, at the end of my tour actually, I decided we would have a photograph of all the people that I had worked with. And as we were putting the chairs away, there was suddenly this boom echoed all the way around the hills. It's quite clear what had happened. There'd been a larger device had gone off somewhere not too far away. One of their patrols had been ambushed on the Chancellor's Road, 2 vehicles, 2 Saracens, and the second vehicle had been taken out. So I went, got in a helicopter, had a look around the site, and there was just this massive hole. The vehicle had effectively disintegrated. The soldiers had been killed instantaneously, but not blown to pieces. Their bodies had been kept together by the webbing and all the rest of it, but the skeletons were shattered. And that was a very sad day. And that was the other end of the Chancellor's Road, whereas earlier in the year we'd had exactly the same size device.
The bomb maker, as far as I was concerned, I didn't see them really as a personal enemy. They, in the most part, they weren't out to get me. Occasionally they were.
We didn't think too much about the terrorists that we were up against. We were more involved in the intricacies of the devices that they were planting. And I considered that it was a privilege to do that job. It was a job where you were the man on the ground, the only one that could really sort out the problem.
But you did have to have respect for the fact that they were obviously very, very intelligent people. The electrical engineering on a lot of their devices were absolutely outstanding. We weren't interested in the politics of the bombers, and in fact you had bombers from both sides, the Catholic or nationalists and the Protestants, and there was no inquiry as to who'd actually laid it or why it was laid. We were there just to get rid of the thing.
The enemy in these circumstances is completely anonymous. You don't see the enemy, you don't know who they are. What I do know is that they were highly professional in what they did. They rewrote the anarchist cookbook, frankly. Most terrorist organisations today will have learned from the tactics that they used against us. But, you know, they are absolutely ruthless and without pity. And their campaign was against innocent women and children, and I've seen the results. So, in a sense, they are anonymous, and I don't have any feelings for them, one way or the other.
321 EOD were a very tight-knit squadron, and by the end of 1974, the death toll amongst their ranks had reached 14. The pressure on ATOs starting a new tour became greater, as did the anxiety felt by their families back home in England.
I didn't go for my first tour until 1973, but the year before that, I lost 2 or 3 or maybe 4 very good friends, and I suddenly realised that, you know, this was quite serious. I always remember coming back to the Northern Ireland with Ron Beckett on the ferry, and within 3 or 4 days of us being on the ferry together, he was dead. A very unfortunate situation where, you know, he went into the shop after laying a disruptor, and as he walked in, a tile fell off the roof and hit the bomb and set it off and killed him. Just plain bad luck.
When we went to Northern Ireland to do this job, we were very much involved in what we were doing, and you didn't really have time to think about what was going on at home with your wife, and I had a wife and a young baby, a 2-year-old. But if there was an explosion and an operator was injured or anything like that, we were to ring home to say, it's not us, you know, I'm safe, don't worry, and that sort of thing. But they did worry, and in many ways it was worse for them, because they didn't really know what we were dealing with.
I mean, I used to phone my wife and she'd say, have you been busy? No. So you would play down what you were doing. When I went back at the end of the tour and she found out some of the stuff that I'd been doing, she said, but you told me you were doing nothing. I said, yeah, well, that was just to keep you unworried. But I think the wives of ATOs and ATs are a special kind anyway, because they, you know, to be married to a bloke who's always at risk, even in his normal job of possibly getting injured or killed, takes some special woman.
At the end of my tour of duty, I was replaced by another warrant officer Michael O'Neill. I know Mick for some time. We'd served together before. And he took over my team, and I left the province. I left on the Monday, and it was the following Sunday. The father-in-law said to me, there's a soldier been killed in Ireland, in Newry. And I said to my wife, I said, I've got a bad feeling about this. Anyway, the news came on the radio, and suddenly the warrant officer, the soldier killed in Ireland this morning, has been named as Warrant Officer Michael O'Neill. And, you know, I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach. I just sat down, my wife burst into tears. You know, it was, all I could think of was the boy's family, really. Mick was called to a car that had been used in the shooting of a police officer at White Cross, and the car was parked just here on the crossroads there. Now, clearly, the car had been used in a murder, and Mick would have wanted as much forensic evidence to be collected as possible, and so he took it easy working on the car. I mean, our modus operandi on car was often to burn them out and blow them up, but Mick decided not to do that, and over the next hour or so, 2 hours perhaps, he worked to clear that car. And we don't know what happened after that, because unfortunately his number two had been asked to get some equipment from the rear of the vehicle, and didn't even know that Mick had gone back down to the car. And suddenly there was a crack of an explosion. Everybody realised that Mick wasn't around. There are two types of operators, you know, those that are lucky and those that are unlucky. Mick O'Neill was very unlucky. You know, you could put yourself in my position to know that you could have done it similarly to Mick, and if I had, it would have been me. And that's the way it works in this job. You know, it's a lonely crossroads. And people drive past here every day and no one knows what happened here. And I guess that's the way it is. You still hear them talking. You can still see their faces. They're always going to be with you for the rest of your life. And yeah, maybe you forget about it for so long, and then there's something happens and it brings it back. It's the same with all soldiers. You don't forget your friends and colleagues who didn't make it. You're there, you've made it there, but for the grace of God.
People have asked me on a few occasions what makes a good EOD operator. It's very difficult to determine because we're all completely different people. Courage is particularly important. Courage, not least, to walk up to something that's got a good chance of killing you if you get something wrong. Selfless commitment, I think, is the second important attribute, because you're working as part of a team and you're prepared to put your life down for that team, regardless of what life you have back anywhere else. Clarity of thought. If you don't get your threat assessment right and you don't respect your opponent, well, you're in trouble. So if you've got all those attributes together, you're probably going to survive the long walk.
You look back on the Northern Ireland conflict, which is pretty much over now. We lost 17 operators. 3/4 of those who died were killed by the end of 1974. That was a time when everything was most volatile. The IRA were rolling out new tactics all the time. Our equipment and our RenderSafe procedures were relatively immature. When you consider that these men were, for the most part, ammunition examiners, that when the campaign broke out, there was no pool of high specialists to do this job. These were ordinary men being asked to do what many would consider is an extraordinary job. It's not simply about recognition to me, it's about appreciation. You know, have these men, what they did, under those circumstances, have they really been appreciated? Because I don't think they have.
Those guys from the early 70s, in particular between 1971 and 75, paid with their lives ultimately. And if we hadn't taken those casualties at that time in Northern Ireland in those early days, we probably wouldn't have as a robust system which has developed over 40 years that we have now.
The thing I remember most about Northern Ireland is the success that we had, the excitement that we felt when we prevented people being injured or we saved someone's property or his business. That gave me a great deal of satisfaction.
Look at this, look at this now. They're spending all their time. This is fantastic.
People say you're a hero for doing what you did, and I don't consider we are heroes at all. We did what we were trained to do. We did the job we were trained to do.
Quite often I'll be walking along and suddenly, you know, Northern Ireland will pop into my head. And quite often I think of Nice One Cyril, especially it was played on the radio the other day whilst I was out walking, and I just chuckled to myself and took me back to the Little Diamond and all these people singing Nice One Cyril.
People say, were all these people's deaths worth it? I don't think it was worth it. So all life was lost, has been wasted. But I think the current situation in Northern Ireland, where they were to where they are today, it's been a long and torturous thing, but it's a fantastic thing that peace reigns now. And we just got to hope it does not stumble back into the anarchy of yesterday, and I don't think it will.
When rolled out flat, the technical drawings for the world's finest ocean liner are over 20 feet long. Titanic season on BBC Northern Ireland.